Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street partners with businesses, organisations, unions and social democratic parties across Australia and the globe to train leaders, develop engagement strategies and empower people to organise for change. In 2020, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks that want to make a difference, inspire, give hope and enable leadership to achieve their shared purpose. To find out how you can engage or partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your favourite centre-left weekly political and cultural podcast that dives into the progressive issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And we're heading back overseas again today because we are speaking with Shannon Talbert, who we've spoken to before. Shannon is the National Deputy Field Director for Colour of Change, which is the largest online racial justice organisation in the United States that is essentially fighting for justice for African Americans. If you recall, we spoke to Shannon when we were over in the United States in November last year as a part of the Dunn Street United States Engagement Mission. And we were going to be over there we were going to be over in the United States during this year's engagement mission, but obviously all of the restrictions have been put in place across the globe because of coronavirus has meant that we're not going over this year, but we will endeavour to hopefully, fingers crossed, get over there next year. But even though we couldn't get over there, I wanted to get Shannon on the phone and have a bit of a chat to her about how things are going since we last spoke. Clearly, things have definitely changed in the space of racial justice for African Americans. So today was an important podcast in many, many ways. Also, thanks very much to everyone who's given us heaps of feedback, really positive feedback on last week's episode, which had David Feeney and Eric Locke, two former state secretaries of the Victorian branch of the Labor Party, who came on to talk about Labor Party reform in the wake of the 60 Minutes and the Age report into branch stacking in the Victorian branch, which resulted in essentially the suspension of the administration of the party and it being handed over to former Premier Steve Bracks and Jenny Macklin. Anyway, we got heaps of really positive responses. It is by far and away the most listened to episode of Socially Democratic thus far since we first began in March or April last year. And we got heaps and heaps of really positive responses and a lot of interest. And I just really appreciate people getting in touch with myself through our various Dunn Street social media platforms, which is a nice segue to say, don't forget to subscribe to Socially Democratic on your favourite podcast app. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and all the other sort of podcast apps. And please leave a rating and a review if you listen to us on Apple Podcast. And to get all of the updates for Socially Democratic, be sure to follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Okay, let's get to today's episode. We're taping this one at 2 a.m. on Sunday morning, and we're doing that at this particular time because our guest is not in this time zone, but not only is she not in this time zone, she's one very busy organiser. Shannon Talbert from Colour of Change. Welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Thank you for having me, Stephen. Yes, it is much more suitable time here. It's 12 o'clock on Saturday for me. The
last time we spoke was in November last year when we were over in DC, and we actually did a podcast together and talked a bit about some of the good work that Colour of Change is undertaking in the racial justice space. You know, fast forward to today, so much has happened in the United States since the start of 2020 with the impact of coronavirus on both the US economy and on the US healthcare system, and now with the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, which has ignited this national protest movement around racial justice and policing in the United States. I just want to get a sense from you about what were your initial thoughts when you first heard about the shootings of Ahmaud or George? What thoughts went through your mind?
Well, like you mentioned, Corona has ruined a lot of things. So I was in my house, and I had been avoiding the news. I hadn't watched it. I think I waited 2.5 days before I actually watched the video, and the only reason I watched it was because I had to write about it. And so I think it was horrible. And I just remember sitting there with my hand over my mouth, wondering why $20 and a counterfeit $20 bill shouldn't end in death. It actually shouldn't even end in an arrest. And so for me, that was it was horrible. And I just, thought immediately of my brother, of my cousin, of my dad, and all of their interactions with the police.
So you experienced that moment and the impact that it has on you, but at the same time, you work for a national organisation that actually deals with the impacts or tries to prevent these moments occurring. How do you mentally process moving from the emotional and the rawness of it to then basically going to work and trying to create change?
Yeah, so I think for me, color change follows a very descriptive model in which we first respond. We're a digital first organization, and so we respond by giving folks something to do. Our criminal justice team launched a petition immediately calling for the 4 officers involved to be arrested. And as we were thinking about that, I work directly with our member-led work. And so managing our field staff, thinking about what do we do in order to engage people in this moment. And so one of the things that we knew we had to do was to be able to reach out to folks in Milwaukee. And so we coordinated. We actually have a little bit of lag time in making sure that folks respond. The first thing that we did, of course, was tell folks to share the petition. As we're thinking about sharing the petition, we're always thinking about how are we continuing to build, how are we continuing to get more folks engaged. I sent masks, worked with all of our organizers. We have organizers that work with members in 19 different cities. And so focusing on making sure that our folks were safe in response to the coronavirus was also one of my first priorities. So we sent masks, we sent hand sanitizers, and we sent gloves. So thinking about what are the ways that we can support the direct action that's happening in the moment.
You just mentioned there coronavirus in your remarks. I'm wondering how much the economic, health and social impacts of COVID-19 has had on the significance of these particular protests this year as opposed to previous years, say Ferguson or Baltimore in the mid-2000s.
Well, I think for us, it was clear that this would end in disaster from the initial response in March. You see that we have a world leader who's not willing to put on a mask. Corporate and government leaders failed in how they responded to COVID-19. We've got folks that still haven't even gotten a single check. COVID-19 is continuing to kill Black businesses, Black jobs, suppressing the Black vote. School children don't have access to the learning materials that they need. And so when we think about the future of Black lives and Black families and Black communities, we knew that, this was a catalyst. People are at home, and the one thing that America continues to do is produce massive racial injustice as we think about it in response to COVID. You see Black communities where workers in hospitals in Detroit didn't have PPE gear. And so as you think about it, the response of corporations and government leaders was was a failed one. And so as people are sitting at home, they will find something to do. And this was a catalyst for giving folks something to do and to take action and to respond to the injustices that we're facing, not just in the criminal justice system.
With the dual threat of dealing with the impact that coronavirus is having on the Black community in the United States, then at the same time, the death of Black citizens. How does Colour of Change work out what you prioritise? Because you were doing work in the space of trying to overcome racial injustice and the way that Corona was impacting in that respect. Then how do you then pivot, or how do you prioritise to then say, right, we need to now deal with the death of one of our citizens?
So Colour of Change, our campaigns team has 4 teams within it. So we have our digital and democracy team. We have our media, culture, and economic justice team. We have our criminal justice team, and we have our movement building team. I am a part of the movement building team. And so a lot of our work is focused on getting folks involved, making sure that they have a concrete way to take action. We worked hand in hand with our media, culture, and economic justice team to stand up petitions, to make sure to recruit members, to talk about what was happening in the community. So one of the first things we did was work on forcing decision makers in cities to suspend rent payments. So rent payments, mortgage payments, those things that were immediately hitting people. We knew people were out of work, and the economic impact of that was massive. The other thing that our criminal justice team did, they at the beginning of March, they launched a website called Humane Outbreak. We knew that jails would be one of the first places that you would see massive outbreaks. And with folks contained, we want to make sure that we're getting folks out and as many people as possible. The rate of detainment in America far exceeds that of any other country. And so as we're thinking about what does it look like, we need to decarcerate. We need to let people out. We need to let people go home so that they can safely quarantine. And
how do you do that?
So I think we think about this in stages. I don't think it's like all one thing, but immediately as far as like the humane outbreak response, we had a set of core demands where we were demanding a just response to this outbreak. And so making sure that we were thinking about how we prevent the spread of disease, reducing the jail and prison and detention center populations before an outbreak occurs. It's the best and the safest way to prevent the spread of the disease and reduce the threat for the most vulnerable people who were incarcerated. Empowering folks to use all their powers, executive clemency, commutations, furloughs, those were all of some of the things that we were thinking about. Stopping the cycle of people in and out of jails and detention centers. So basically making sure that you're not arresting new folks, especially as we are thinking about like immigration bonds, making sure that you're leaving people alone in these times where they need to be safely quarantined in their pods with their families. And then making sure that we protect people who are incarcerated. So eliminating requirements for incarcerated workers to perform the tasks that put them at risk for contracting the disease, and allowing them to opt out of different things. So responsibilities at work that would make them more vulnerable. Making sure that they have the appropriate gear. That's just a baseline one that wasn't necessarily adhered to. And then for folks that are working, making sure that folks who are incarcerated are getting a minimum wage. Basically upholding the dignity of and humanity of people. not extending solitary confinement as a substitution for people who are in prison, and then making sure that they get the proper medical care. So one of the things that we were concerned about was thinking about, like, they would say, oh, this was a reason to put people in solitary confinement, but making sure that they get the proper medical care instead.
Colour of Change is a member of the Leading Change network that subscribes to the Gantz model of community organising. And because of this, you've had thousands of leaders across cities and towns in the United States that you've developed their leadership over a number of years. What roles do those leaders play in the nationwide protests that we're seeing at the moment? And how much has this tested your own organisational capacity?
Yeah, so we have to say thanks for Leading Change Network to helping in that work. They are working with our team directly right now. And so one of the things that they are working on is, as we're coming out of this rapid response moment, is really focusing on getting back to those basics. It's very easy in a rapid response moment to just run around with your head on fire, very much like, this has to be done, this has to be done, this has to be done, and just trying to check all of the boxes. So Leading Change Network is giving us that moment to step back and make sure that we are learning from all the things that we have done and accomplished in this moment. I think one of the things that was really impactful that we saw immediately in mobilizing our members was, as we started thinking about the ways in which we could really fight for long-term systemic change, we had the opportunity in Milwaukee. We were pushing a defund the police ask, and in defunding the police, we're asking to move that money to community services, things that are needed in our communities very badly: libraries, public health, affordable housing, all of those things were demands of where we were saying, take that money that the police would have gotten, that bump in their increase in their budget, and reroute that to education. Make sure that our communities have after school programs, make sure that they have libraries, make sure that they have places where they can, where we can respond without police. And so our members jumped into action by basically all over the country. We had members who got on the phones. They heard about what we were doing. And what they did was they sent text messages to people directly in Milwaukee. And so as they're sending those text messages to people in Milwaukee, asking them to take action, they were asking them to call their local city council member. I want to say that we had that textathon on a Wednesday night. It was one of the highest response rates we'd ever had from people on text. And by Sunday, the city council had said that they were going to defund the police.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. How do you go about setting your goals? Like, how do you, what does success look like? What is realistic? Particularly with a lot of these short-term goals that you're trying to work towards in the moment. I mean, are you throwing Hail Marys, or is it grounded in something that you feel like you actually can achieve if you're organized well enough?
Yeah, so I think we think about how do we make a moment into a movement. Over the course of 2 weeks, Color of Change grew dramatically. We saw thousands of people who were concerned about racial justice from the lens of police accountability take action. Our goal is to string that narrative together, making sure that folks understand that racial equity is not just a matter of criminal justice reform, that it's about holding the media accountable for the images that they portray of Black folks. It's about making sure that we have economic justice, that our schools are equitable. And so thinking about it in a broader lens of what are all of the things? It's not just one thing. And so yes, we look at what are the immediate changes that we can focus on, and then what are the long-term systemic changes that can make this a game changer for our communities and result in a tangible win for our people.
Marshall Gantz defines organising as the work of leadership or enabling leadership to achieve shared purpose in moments of uncertainty. These are very uncertain moments for you guys right now. And
that uncertainty is the most important part.
Wow, exactly right.
That we focus on at all times. We are revisiting our engagement organizing curriculum because we want to always recenter that moment of uncertainty. So everybody has the ability to lead. What will you do in that uncertainty?
And obviously Gantz talks about public narrative and the story of self, us, and now. And in that story of self, we're asked to consider a moment in time in which we faced a challenge and where we got the courage to act, or where does the hope lie? And I'm wondering, in these moments right now in the United States, where do you find the hope?
Yeah, so my personal story, I always think about my dad and the way that he developed leadership in me and us as children. So there's three of us. He was a small business owner, and in 1996, I got 2 pairs of shoes to start the school year. He had a really great job at that time, and in 1997 he started his business, and it was back to 1 pair of shoes, and he's like, "You want to go with me?" And I was like, "Am I getting paid?" And he was like, "Do you have a room?" And for me, I was like, "Fine, I'll go." And he had a cleaning company, and he went in to buff the floors of the gym, and he told me, he gave me a bucket and told me to go clean. He had a contract with the Archdiocese of Tyrone, and we were cleaning this Catholic school. And I was brought up in a Baptist church, but I went to Presbyterian school. And one of the things that you hear in the Baptist church amongst folks all the time is like, cleanliness is next to godliness. Bathrooms is disgusting. I was like, apparently they don't have these same rules in Catholic school. And I just remember the brown stained floors and the yellow underneath the toilet, and I did not want to be there. And so I cleaned it, and my dad came in to check it, and he looked at it, and he said, "Shannon, all you have is your work product." And so he said, "Nothing." He said, "They don't see me when they come back to school. They see how well I did this." He said, "Go look at the gym." And he had me look at the gym, and the floors were sparkling in the gym. And then I looked at the bathroom, and I had not done equally as well of a job. I was just like, "Where is your staff? Why am I here?" But I went back in, and he showed me how to clean the toilet, and I cleaned it again. And I did a better job. Over time, he realized, like, hey, this isn't the job for her. But I was really good at keeping up with receipts and managing his books. And so by 14, I was doing small business taxes. And he continued to look for, what is that role that she can own? What is that thing that she can do? And I think that's pretty much, like, as I think about this work, like, what are we presenting to people, and what are the roles that they can take? How are we giving them an opportunity to lead? And so I think about that a lot, and really try to focus on what can I present to folks that they will want to do to take action in their local communities. We at Color of Change really focus on organizing from a stance of Black joy, and Black joy is a form of resistance. And so I really try to embed that into all of the work that we do, and our team focuses very much on embedding Black joy into all of the work that we do.
Actually, you spoke a lot about that when you ran a session with us in terms of Black joy when we were in DC in October last year. I actually think it's worthwhile you actually sharing that with the rest of the millions of Australians that listen to this podcast. Talk a bit about how you celebrate and embrace that. I think that's really important to share with everyone else.
You actually, I'm in this phase of trying to write a new organizing manual. And so I've been testing out some language as we're gearing up for the 2020 elections and about to hire some new staff. This is interesting that you asked this question for right now. I'm going to share with you our new language as we start thinking about Black joy. And so it's not new in the sense of the program. I've just kind of been recrafting some of our existing language. And so our program really focuses on how do we serve our community. And so focusing first on community building. Next is service, and then accountability. We do politics with a small p, and basically providing that politically light but authentically Black experience that strengthens our community and celebrates Black joy. And so we talk about the collective cultural experiences that we share, but also understanding that Black joy is not monolithic. And so what is joyful for me, it creates, shared accountability, and we know that we have to celebrate Black joy together, but how others on my team experience Black joy won't always look the same. And so we try to make sure that everybody has a place to celebrate their version of Black joy in this program. And so that means committing to each other, respecting each other in the work, investing in our own leadership and the leadership of others, and then celebrating Black joy together to win for Black people. And so at an event, that's everything from food. In Florida, the Haitian community does food different than the way our Houston squad does it. And so we have to think about what are those local references and how do we bring that into our events, whether it be the food, whether it be the music. We've got a team that really loves their soca versus another team that we've got members on our staff that are from DC and from the DC area, and they like their go-go music. And so bringing all of that into the work to personalize the experience.
I don't want you to pick sides or anything here, Shannon, but do you have a preference in terms of the various chapters of Colour of Change where you'd like to celebrate Black joy? Like, no one in America is going to listen to this, so it's okay. You won't get dobbed in by anyone, all right?
I love all of our members. It's very interesting. Our Houston squad is extremely unique, and our organizer there is amazing. I think it is interesting to see the work and the way that she does it. I also really enjoy our LA squad. They bring their own brand. They have Taco Tuesday, so bringing their own brand of how they do Black joy. Down in Florida, I talked about, our South Florida teams. I really love the work that they're doing down there. And then Philly, of course, Philly and St. Louis, they all have their own different version. Detroit is a special place for us. I think just in general, Detroit and the way that they show up is always, it's interesting to see.
That was a very diplomatic answer there. But you did well. And you ticked off a lot of boxes there.
On where I like to go. I really love to go to Miami just because of the beach. But with Corona, we haven't, we're not taking any flights. So no. I haven't been anywhere since March.
Okay, fair play. Well, you answered that question very well. With so much going on right now across the board, how is Colour of Change? How are you guys keeping on top of the situation? How are you organising in this chaos?
I think, we have to remember our roles and our lanes. We talk a lot about stay in your lane. And so covering each other and filling those gaps, but also understanding what our lane is. My lane is our movement building work. And so making sure that we are engaging our people. And that means talking with other directors across the organization to find out, hey, what are the things that I can engage my people in right now? And then creating those experiences for them so that they had those opportunities. I think our criminal justice team did a great job in the ways in which they responded. And it's up to me to support them and to ensure that they're getting the people power behind the campaigns that they're launching.
How much of the campaign is centrally coordinated, and to what degree is this leadership enabled, all the leadership that is spread out across all the cities? How much is that leadership enabled to develop their own local strategies, tactics, actions, and goals?
It's both and. So we have our member-led work, and then we have our programmatic work. Our programmatic work is led by our in-office staff that manage campaigns, but our member-led work runs through our Organized For platform, which you can find at organized4.org. Any of our members can go and start a petition. And so there are benchmarks in which we set the same way that we would set benchmarks for our campaign staff. We set those benchmarks to support our members in crafting and building their campaigns. So if they have, for instance, we have a team in Tampa. They are strategic thinkers. They're continually thinking about the ways that they can challenge power locally. And they have run, I think, 3 or 4 campaigns this year. One they were able to win early was on holding this apartment complex accountable for the learning of Black students. It was an apartment complex that services a lot of students. Locally, Spectrum is a internet service provider and had offered free internet to students. The apartment company had their own internet service provider, and they were not offering free internet. And so what they did was they held the apartment company accountable to ensure that Moonbeam offered free service to residents for those months until the end of the school year.
I just want to get a sense of the immediate goals that Colour of Change are pursuing in respect to the many cases that the organisation is taking against politicians and police and whatnot with George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery, and also what are some of the wins you've had so far? And the follow-up question is actually more about the long-term goals that Colour of Change are taking in terms of leading up to the November elections, which feels like it's a long way away, but we'll be honest before we know it.
Yeah. So as that defund the police ask was started out as just Milwaukee, we're looking at other cities now. Our criminal justice team just launched a defund the police campaign in DC. Seeing, like I said, we had members text other members in Milwaukee to call their city council members on a Wednesday. By Sunday, the Milwaukee City Council announced that on Monday they would be defunding the police. So I think we were able to see those changes. Those were some of the immediate impacts of the changes. We are thinking about campaigns around no-knock bans. So ensuring that police do not have the ability to enter houses without knocking. So for instance, in the case of Breonna Taylor, we're looking at what does it look like to remove police from schools. Unfortunately, when you look at city schools, a lot of the largest cities that are predominantly Black have a contract with the police to have police in schools. In some places, you have elementary school students who go through the doors and they see a police officer on a daily basis. And this is largely in Black communities. And so focusing on how to get police out of schools, I think we have the criminal justice team thinks largely about what are the systemic changes that we can make as it relates to criminal justice reform. And my work is to ensure that our members know how they can be a part of that work and how they can support on a daily basis. And so whether that is creating local campaigns that mirror our national campaigns, whether that is making calls, sending text messages, that is our immediate goal in making sure that we have our members engaged. That's my immediate goal.
And as you're getting closer to the November elections, I know that you guys are doing a lot of good work in terms of trying to support, I think you're calling them champion prosecutors. Talk to us a bit about that campaign.
Yeah, so Colour of Change PAC is our super PAC. It is the electoral arm of the organization. You can find information on votingwhileblack.com. Basically, for us, we are invested in providing a positive space for Black folks to learn about and engage in the issues that affect our communities. And so as we're thinking about it, we're looking for who are those prosecutors that will uphold our values and that we can hold accountable after they were elected. We recently won an election in Chicago. It's the re-election of Kim Foxx, who we elected initially in 2016 after Anita Alvarez didn't respond, was complicit in a cover-up around the death of Laquan McDonald in Chicago. And so as we start to think about what are those races, we really want to focus on who are those champion candidates that are upholding the baselines of our demands. And so as we think about our demands, we have demands around ending money bail. Prosecutors hold a lot of power. And one of the things that they can do is they can end the practice of money bail. It has been found to be racially biased. It is pointless. It doesn't make people show up. It punishes people for being poor. And so people who have not been convicted of a crime are not able to get out of jail because they don't have the money to get out. And thousands of people are trapped in jail merely because they can't pay their bail. And so looking at people who first are committed to ending money bail. The other thing that we have 6 basic demands when it comes to our prosecutors, and then we look at the local conditions as well. But treating kids like kids, stop putting children in adult jails. They don't belong in adult jails or prisons. They're children. They deserve their childhood. Stopping unnecessary prosecutions, basically those unwarranted and unhelpful prosecutions of low-level offenses don't keep our community safer. They just add to the incarceration rate. And then increasing transparency. In 2018, we elected Wesley Bell in St. Louis, ousting the 18-year incumbent Bob McCullough, who failed to respond to the murder of Michael Brown. And so making sure that we're making the offices of the prosecutor more transparent, releasing the data, which usually leads to decarceration, because prosecutors have incredible amounts of data. And the lack of transparency means that we don't know what's happening. We don't know if they're treating all people fairly by the same standard, if they're letting police off the hook, but basically not opening up that data to the public is a violation of our rights. And so making sure that people have the data to make reasonable choices in their community. And then stopping the anti-immigrant prosecutions. And so separating families and removing people from their communities, it just adds to the incarceration rate. And those are simple things that we can do. And then most importantly in this moment right now is who are those prosecutors that are going to hold police accountable for their actions? They must do their jobs. Prosecutors are elected to maintain that level and that standard of accountability in the community. And so prosecuting police officers when they break the law, as you see that communities are asking for right now. And they're not just asking, they're demanding. They're saying, we will break the system down if you do not hold police accountable for their actions.
And by prosecutors, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming you're talking about sort of district attorneys, people in those roles.
Some places they're called district attorneys, some places they're called state's attorneys, some places they're called prosecutors. So yes, but they all hold the same function and the same role. So they essentially mean the same thing in America.
How does Colour of Change insert itself into electoral campaigns in the United States to ensure that you either hold prosecutors to account or that you work with your constituency to guide them in the right direction to elect or campaign or at least vote for prosecutors that live up to the standards or the expectations that Colour of Change set?
So color change is we think strategically about who and when and why we choose to elect certain prosecutors, and to endorse and support certain prosecutors. Within like I said, we have a criminal justice team, and so we work very closely around the accountability aspect with our criminal justice team, looking at where are those districts where incarceration rates are very high amongst Black people, where are our communities that are most impacted, and then we have to look at the data of like, do we have the votes to win? And if we have the votes to win, who are the candidates there? Are they people that will represent us well and people that we can hold accountable after they are elected? And so we are a fairly small super PAC. We're growing rapidly. We launched our super PAC in our offline engagement program in 2016. So we don't take on every race, but we do take on those in those districts that are really meaningful to our communities. And so looking at the data and looking at the number of voters, looking at the number of Black voters, looking at the number of, we look at voting propensity scores, so the likelihood of people to vote. So we really focus on sporadic voters, those who are most impacted by the criminal justice system, and those who are least likely to go vote. And so we want to make sure that we are doing the work to both educate our communities, but to engage. We really believe in putting the community back in community organizing, and the social aspect. That's the Black joy. That's the social in our social justice. And so making sure that we're doing all of that work to look at the holistic response. We don't want to parachute into a community and say, we know best, do this, Black voters, and tell people what they need. We are listening for what it is that people want. So as we're thinking about that, we're looking at those candidates. We are reaching out to them. Our endorsement process is a fairly long endorsement process. It starts with a questionnaire in which candidates have to go on the record about what their policies will be, and largely in response to what are our basic 6 demands. And then we focus on the district level questions. So the things that are happening locally that our members have expressed concerns about. We have a long history of building relationships with our members, being a digital first organization, to the ways in which we communicate with folks. So our offline approach is to move our digital relationship to a physical relationship. And so how do we begin that process of starting to talk to folks to learn what it is that they want for their communities? What are the hopes and joys that you want to come out of your community? And so how do we move to push for that type of change?
Shannon, I'm wondering if you can share with our audience some of the inspiring stories that have come out of the movement and the national protests in recent months.
Yeah, so I joined one of our organizing calls just the other night, talking to our members in Florida. We are engaged in 2 district attorney races. We'll be engaged in 2 district attorney races there in Orlando and Fort Lauderdale, which is Broward County. And so we had members from all across the state, new members to Color of Change who just recently joined in this massive growth spurt, and existing members who've been with Color of Change forever. And it was a Zoom call. The organizers sent everybody to breakout groups. They had 5 questions, just some trivia to get to know each other, and to start talking. And they came back to the full room, and they were just so happy. And they said, this has been great. There's so much terrible news, but all of the organizing that's happening in the building relationships and communities, even though it's over Zoom, is great. And so they were really excited about just the opportunity to grow and build across the state. Some of the folks were saying, hey, I've been organizing with Color of Change for almost 2 years now. And I came to Color of Change when I was in 2018, when you all were doing that electoral program around the governor's race. And, just seeing these people up and down the state, this has been such a great experience. So I think, we always debrief on the calls of what went well, what would you like to see us do differently. And I saved the chat just because all of it was so uplifting.
The civil rights movement in the United States, all through the generations, is littered with some incredibly inspiring leaders. It has produced some incredibly inspiring, talented people. And I am just wondering who's continuing that legacy. Like, who are the emerging leaders that are coming out of the movement in 2020?
Yeah, so I think I always look within the Color of Change network. And so I think for me, that's like I recently had to think about, like, as we're moving out of the Color of Change network, who are the people that we're working with, and the partners that we're working with on the ground. And so I am inspired by the work of the Dream Defenders in Florida. I am inspired by, we have some really strong members in Tampa, like I said, that have run a lot of campaigns this year. They really get the wheels moving. And so I don't want to name names because I don't want to leave anybody out. But that Tampa squad, just in general, I am always impressed by their leadership. I think if I'm looking across the country, it's always we've got partners in St. Louis, and so thinking about those partners that work together so well, and really showcase the values of their communities in a way that I think is unique to St. Louis. And so I was looking at an article just the other day from Juneteenth. It was last night, actually, with Kayla Reed on it. And she's a partner that Color of Change has worked with in the past. And I'm always inspired by Kayla's leadership also. And so those would be some of the people that I think about. She had organized with Color of Change during the Wesley Bell election, and brought hundreds of volunteers into that office to knock on doors. And so just continuing to think about her leadership and how we uplift local folks. I think our criminal justice team was working directly on the ground with folks in Milwaukee, and it was a coalition of folks. We're also working with a coalition of folks in Detroit right now on the district attorney race. And so I think that is a group of folks that I'm always like interested in what it is that they have to say and what it is that they are thinking about. So Detroit Action, Brandon Snyder up there is doing some great work.
If there's any international folks outside of the United States wanting to lend their support to the good work that you're doing at Color of Change, how can they be a good ally and support a lot of the activities that you have going across the country?
Yeah. So I think every voice is and value add, as long as they are echoing the calls of Black people. I think one of the things that we have to think about is it's not that Black people have all these problems. It's that Black people are creating solutions to problems that were created in our communities. And so we're currently trying to think about what are the ways that we are creating solutions. And so I think for allies, we call them friends and accomplices at Color of Change. And so it's both arming and disarming at the same time, thinking about how are we echoing the lives of the calls of Black folks, and how are we thinking and examining our own practices and policies to ensure that they dismantle white supremacy as opposed to reinforce it. And so if folks are thinking about how can they support, I think spreading the petitions of Color of Change is always very helpful. whether it be folks from an international lens or domestically. I think we, as a digital first organization, we think about the ability to reach multiple audiences and to inspire people to act. That level of solidarity is helpful. I think donations are always helpful. It helps the work to go further. It ensures that we're able to be in more communities. As I mentioned, we're in 19 cities right now, organizing directly with our members. Of course, we always want to expand that work to ensure that we can reach more people. And just echoing the calls for justice. I think, as we see, justice can't be bottled to say that it needs to happen in this one place. We have to think about our daily impact, going back to that definition of leadership of how do we lead in that uncertainty. And so how do we ensure that we enable others to lead and to do that work? And so I think there are specifically sharing the petition, making sure to echo those calls of the people who are locally impacted. And then donations, I think always we have a lot of digital means for tuning in. So tuning in and being aware, constantly re-examining of what can I do to support the voices of Black and Indigenous people of color in my community.
And as a reminder to our Australian listeners anyway, that you can actually donate to Colour of Change. The donation or campaign finance laws in the United States are fairly tricky to navigate. So a lot of the organisations that you may want to lend support to, you can't because they're PACs or for whatever reason that I'm not going to go into right now. However, Colour of Change you can donate to, which is great. And you can just go to their website and on the prompts at the front there, donate away. It's colorofchange.org from memory. Is that right, Shannon?
Yep. So our work for the C3 and the C4 is colorofchange.org. And so the C3 largely focuses on our education work. Our C4 focuses on our advocacy work. So those demands that you were talking about before of defunding the police, that is through our C4. And you can find that at colorofchange.org.
And remember, that's colour spelt the American way, COLOR. Shannon Talbot, thank you so much for taking time out of your incredibly hectic schedule to come on to Socially Democratic today. It's been really, really enjoyable re-engaging with you and talking to you once again. I really do appreciate your candor and your honesty and your stories. I can imagine this is an incredibly emotional and tiring time for you and a lot of people working in this space. So it's great to have you on the podcast today. And look, we wish you and the rest of the team at Colour of Change the best of luck in the coming weeks and months as you continue to do great work, fighting for what's such an important thing for the people of the United States, in particular for African Americans. No, thank you so much, and thank you for your continued support. I think in terms of organizing, we always need those people that analogy of being a fish in the water and being able to have conversations to think about, oh, what are you doing? How are you doing that? It's always really helpful. So I appreciate you extending the opportunity to be on the podcast, and I appreciate you for continuing to reach out. Thanks, Shannon.